And actually, I got involved in all of this because of Danny Casolaro, who was murdered in 1991, I believe May of 1991. And what happened with me was I was living out on Bainbridge Island in the Puget Sound, and one night I woke up with a nightmare. I don't usually have nightmares, but this was a whopper. And in this dream, I was in a kind of a hotel room, and there was this guy with kind of long blondish hair, and he was completely naked, and his whole arm, both arms were just bleeding down onto the ground, and the ground was just filling up with blood. And then he looked up at me with like anguish in his eyes. And he said, "Man, you have to help me." And then I woke up and I was completely flipped out. And then I got on the ferry to go do a job the next day. And I always bought the Seattle Times when I would take the ferry ride, the 40-minute ferry ride. And in those days, I wouldn't do it now. And there on like page 4 was the guy I saw in my dream. And it was an article about how this investigative journalist named Danny Casolaro had committed suicide in a West Virginia motel room. And it flipped me out. I completely flipped out. And literally within months, I'd started my radio show on KCMU FM. Mind Over Matters was the name of the show, which I started covering all of this stuff. I got deeply involved in a bunch of different things. And I was at the peripheral of the Octopus Danny Casolaro murder. I did talk to the guy who's featured heavily in that documentary, Michael Riconosciuto, by phone from the Pierce County Jail, where he was serving time for meth, I think, making meth, which I wouldn't believe because he was too smart to be doing something stupid like that. He was clearly a very intelligent guy. I knew how to program assembly and BASIC, and I talked to him, and he definitely knew how to program really well. He knew all the right terms that only a really good programmer would know. And I was left with this idea that what he had the talent to actually do what he said he did. And what did he say he did? What he said he did was that he took this software called Promis and wrote a back door into it for the CIA. And that's why I called him. And and so I questioned him to find out if he was a BS artist. And like all people that work in intelligence, a lot of stuff he says is just thrown in there to confuse you. So you have to be really careful. It's a very difficult path to navigate through the wilderness when you're dealing with these guys. But, I did know enough about programming to know that he was a very, very good programmer. And so I came away believing that that part of what he said was true. And he served, I believe, like 20 years. I think he just got out recently. They show him getting out in the documentary. And Michael, if you're out there, I'm glad you're free. But what's really interesting about this whole Octopus thing is it actually links to JFKX, believe it or not. And that's why I'm so intrigued by it. So as we've been talking in several episodes about these intel wars, that actually started with the election of John F. Kennedy. I'm just going to really repeat this real fast because I want to get to the real meat of this. But basically, the CIA took over the intelligence of the United States in 1947, usurping the Office of Naval Intelligence, which had been the #1 intelligence agency. And they didn't take it very well. That's why the CIA's first director was an admiral. They were trying to assuage the Navy from being angry. And so 13 years later, after the Eisenhower administration was ending, the ONI really wanted to find out what was going on in the CIA. The CIA was requesting all sorts of very secretive documents from them. They didn't want to give up, and they were in a quandary. And so they put 2 candidates up for election in 1960. Richard Nixon was Office of Naval Intelligence, and John F. Kennedy was Office of Naval Intelligence. They did this to ensure that they wouldn't lose. And that's why Nixon didn't complain when Kennedy obviously stole the Chicago election from Nixon. Everyone wondered why Nixon just went, oh, okay, well, see you next time, because that was the operation was to get somebody in there. It wasn't to win the election. It was to get somebody from the Office of Naval Intelligence into the presidency to find out what the hell was going on. So Kennedy gets in there. Of course, we know what happens. He and Bobby uncover all their stuff, and then his life is threatened. And then the Office of Naval Intelligence, goes in and rescues their agent, as they should do. And with his life and his family's life was under duress, and so we start beginning this weird succession of presidents that are either Office of Naval Intelligence or they're CIA. So Johnson was clearly in with the CIA and the military industrial complex. And then they elected Nixon. Nixon was again Office of Naval Intelligence. And you'll notice that the Office of Naval Intelligence presidents I'm going to show you never last very long in office. Kennedy lasted 3 years. Nixon got reelected, the only one that got reelected. And he only lasted 5 years because they threw him out on Watergate, which was a complete CIA operation. So Nixon, and the other thing that unites them is they don't start wars. They're the only people that I'm going to list out here that don't start any wars. So Kennedy didn't start a war. Nixon got us out of Vietnam and didn't start a war. Then the next president was Ford, and he was CIA. He was in the Warren Commission. Then the next one was Jimmy Carter, who was definitely ONI. He was officially Office of Naval Intelligence. He, of course, put Stansfield Turner in, who was a Navy, pissing the CIA off. And here's where Casolaro and the Octopus comes in. So Stansfield Turner does a complete evaluation of the CIA, and he finds all sorts of bad people in there. And he makes a list. And by the way, those guys in the Octopus film, they show a list of all the people they think are in the Octopus kind of on the site. And it's every one of those people. Every one of those people that's on that list in that documentary is the people that I'm about to talk about. So Stansfield Turner on Halloween night, 1978, he did what in the intelligence community is called the Halloween Night Massacre. He fired, we don't know the exact number, somewhere between 200 to 300 CIA agents and sent them into complete and utter oblivion. We thought. But what happened is that a certain ex-president who lived in Texas, who had been the head of the CIA, created a clandestine intelligence agency, one that was not beholden to anyone, that was completely off the books, using these fired 200 to 300 agents. We know about this because it culminated in the Iran Contra scandal in 1986, 8 years after the firing, in which we discovered that we discovered the clandestine intelligence agency, and we discovered that they're running drugs and guns, mostly out of Mena, Arkansas. Bill Clinton was governor at the time, and that this clandestine organization, when Reagan got elected and Bush was his vice president, they really hit the pedal to the metal, and they got all the money and funding and the looking away that they wanted. And they immediately cocaine began pouring into the United States. I was alive then, remember very well what happened. Crime started skyrocketing. People started going missing. All sorts of really weird stuff started going on. And, as much as people want to praise Reagan, he let it go on his watch. And it was a lot of bad stuff. And
so just to clarify here, so there was this group of individuals, really bad people within the CIA. They were then fired, and then they organized this kind of black budget arm of the CIA and set up for guns and drug smuggling.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting part of this documentary too, because what they did is they pretty much just went out and set up on Indian, Native American land.
Yeah, that was kind of the brilliant part about this whole operation, is that they could operate within the United States but not be inside the United States if they operated on Indian reservations, Native American reservations, because they're technically not part of the United States. That's why they can have gambling and all the other things that they have, because federal law doesn't have anything to do with them. They control and govern their own land. And so the CIA sent in this guy named, I can't remember his name right now. I believe they mentioned him in the documentary, and he just has gobs of money, and he just comes in and gives it to all the Cabazon Native Americans, and they start a casino, and all sorts of nasty stuff is going on this Indian reservation, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it because it's not United States domain. And that was the brilliant part. And who knows how many other Native American reservations they took over, because they're rock bottom poor, right? They put them in the worst places, the worst land possible is where the reservations are. And so they're easy pickings. You come in with a bunch of money and you can take over really fast. And that's what these guys did. And so around 1987, Danny Casolaro, who's a journalist, he reads an article he was working for a computer magazine, actually, and he reads an article about this Promis software, right? And he decides to start looking into it. And he probably wishes that he hadn't. And he got involved in the investigation of it, and then he met Michael Riconosciuto, and as he spread out his investigation, looking into these exact people, he began to call the whole thing the Octopus, because it was in everything. It was in everywhere he looked. He found the tentacles of this group, this clandestine ex-CIA, off the books organization.